My son brought the contract. His wife brought the coffee. The maid whispered, "Don't drink it," so I switched cups. 5 minutes later, my daughter-in-law collapsed. The pen was already in my hand when my daughter-in-law looked up from the coffee tray and smiled at me. That smile. I've seen 1,000 smiles in 30 years of business. I've sat across from liars and charmers and men who thought I was just a widow holding a company she didn't fully understand. I've learned to read a face the way you read a contract, not for what it says, but for what it carefully, deliberately omits. Claire's smile omitted everything. It was perfect in the way of magazine covers, symmetrical, warm, the kind of smile designed to be received rather than given. And as she held that cup out toward me, white porcelain, thin wisp of steam rising, something in the architecture of the moment felt wrong, the way a room feels wrong before you locate the smell. I reached for the cup, and Patricia moved. That's where this story begins. Not with the poison, not with the paperwork already spread across my mahogany table, tabs flagged in yellow, signature lines helpfully indicated with small adhesive arrows. Not with my son sitting across from me in his best blazer, speaking about my exhaustion with the practiced concern of someone who has rehearsed the word retirement in front of a mirror. It begins with a 63-year-old woman named Patricia Osei dropping a tray, pressing her lips close to my ear, and whispering 4 words that stopped the world. Don't drink it. Trust me. My name is Sandra Whitlock. I am 61 years old. I built Whitlock Supply Group from a 900-square-foot warehouse in Decatur, Georgia, with $47,000 in savings, a second-hand forklift I learned to operate myself, and a BlackBerry I slept with under my pillow. My husband, Richard, died of a pulmonary embolism in 2004. He was 53. It was a Tuesday. I got the call in the middle of a vendor negotiation, excused myself, drove to Piedmont Hospital, held his hand for 11 minutes, and then drove back to finish the meeting. I'm not proud of that. I'm also not ashamed. We needed the contract. Richard would have understood. He was the one who always said, "Keep moving, Sandra. The world doesn't pause for grief." He was right. It doesn't. What the world did give me, eventually, was a son, Lucas, my only child, born in 1990, raised in the years when I was building everything. He grew up watching me work, watching me fight, watching me sacrifice, and I thought, foolishly, naively, with the full force of a mother's blind love, that he respected it. Lucas was 34 when this happened, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way his father had been handsome, strong jaw, easy confidence. He had a business degree from Emory and a talent for presenting other people's work as his own. I had promoted him to VP of Operations 3 years prior because I wanted him beside me, because I wanted to begin the slow handoff of everything I'd built, because he was my son and I believed, in the way only a mother can believe in a child who has given her every reason not to, that he was ready. He married Claire Ashworth in 2019. She came from money, South Carolina money, the old quiet kind that doesn't need to be announced. She was slender and elegant, with the kind of composure that could be mistaken for warmth. She had been a pharmaceutical sales rep before marrying Lucas. She knew chemistry, she knew dosage, she knew how to make something deadly sound friendly. I didn't know that yet. What I knew on the morning of September 9th was that my son had called the night before to say he wanted to finalize the transfer discussions over breakfast. I had a corporate attorney, James Beaumont of Beaumont and Keller, drawing up a succession framework. It was in progress. Nothing was meant to be signed yet, but Lucas said he had a tighter version, simpler. He said Claire had helped prepare it. He said it would be quick. I should have heard the rush in his voice. I heard it. I filed it under enthusiasm and made coffee and went to bed. They arrived at 8:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch when the doorbell rang, a habit from decades of back-to-back meetings, and I remember thinking, 14 minutes early. Lucas was never early. He had Richard's warmth and none of his punctuality. Claire came in first, carrying the tray. She must have prepared it in her car or stopped somewhere on the way, because she walked in with it already set. 3 cups, a small creamer, a sugar bowl arranged with the kind of precision you see in hotel lobbies. She carried it like an offering, like something she'd been rehearsing. "I made it the way you like," she said, setting it on the side table near the window. I hadn't specified how I liked it. I told myself, she's trying. She wants to make a good impression. This is her way of being thoughtful. I told myself a lot of things that morning. The folders were already on my table. Lucas must have let himself in earlier, or Patricia had let him in. I'd have to ask her about that. 3 folders, thick with paper, flagged yellow and red. The signature lines weren't just flagged. They were predated, September 9th, the day of. Lucas shook my hand, shook it like a contractor, and sat down and immediately began talking. His voice was modulated, calm, the way a person sounds when they've rehearsed something so many times the performance has fully replaced the feeling. He talked about my health. He had noticed I'd seemed tired lately. He talked about legacy, how he wanted to honor what I'd built. He talked about rest, about trust, about how he had big plans he was eager to share with me once things were official. He talked the way someone talks when they're trying to keep your eyes on their face and away from their hands. Claire was quiet. She moved once to adjust the tray, slide my cup a half-inch closer to my reach, a gesture so small, so casual, that I only remembered it later when I understood what it meant. She was watching my hands, not my face, my hands. I reached for the cup. Patricia stumbled. I have replayed that stumble more than 100 times. It was not graceful. Patricia is not a woman who stumbles. She moves through a space with the quiet economy of someone who has kept other people's homes functioning for decades, who has internalized the geometry of every room, who knows exactly exactly where each piece of furniture stands. She does not stumble, but she stumbled now, hard, with her whole weight, and the tray lurched and coffee splashed in a wide brown arc across the carpet near the window, and Claire's face, for exactly 1/2 second, showed something that was not irritation and was not surprise. It showed rage. Honestly, Claire said, her voice dropping into its lower register, the one you use when you're controlling something, can you not be more careful? Lucas looked at Patricia. His jaw was tight. His eyes were flat. Whatever mask he wore for me, whatever sun-shaped performance he had prepared, it didn't extend to Patricia. He looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't accounted for. Patricia dropped to her knees immediately, cloth in hand, pressing into the carpet, and she leaned close to me. I had stepped toward her, instinctively, the way you move toward someone who's fallen, and she spoke 4 words directly into the space between us. Don't drink it, trust me. Then she kept wiping the carpet, murmuring apologies, and I straightened up and said, it's fine, Patricia, don't worry. And my face was a mask, and my hands were completely still, and my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. I turned toward the tray. Lucas had shifted slightly. Claire was watching my hands again. I picked up my cup, and in the moment that Lucas reached for his own cup and Claire turned to move a folder, I set mine down and reached across and picked up Claire's cup, unhurried, completely natural, as though I'd simply reached for the nearest handle. Nobody saw. I've run logistics for 30 years. I know how misdirection works. I've survived boardrooms full of men who underestimated me. I know how to move my hands when nobody's watching. I lifted the cup, took one small sip. It tasted wrong. Bitter underneath the coffee, the way certain medications taste when they've been crushed. A chemical flatness that doesn't belong in anything meant to be consumed by a human being with a normal life ahead of them. I recognized it the way you recognize a smell from childhood, instantly in the gut, before the brain has finished processing. I set it down. I listened to my son explain how the transfer would work. 49% of shares immediately. The remaining 51 within 18 months pending board approval. He was confident he could manage. He used phrases like smooth transition and mutual benefit, and your legacy protected. His voice was warm and measured and completely, surgically hollow. 5 minutes later, Claire stopped talking mid-sentence. She had been adding something about signatory protocol, something about the timing of filings, and then she simply stopped. Her hand moved to the edge of the sofa, not gracefully, groping, the way a person reaches for something solid when the floor moves. Her knees buckled. She went down hard, hip first, then shoulder, and the folders slid off the table in a slow cascade of paper, and Lucas screamed her name in a voice I had never heard from him. Raw, genuinely raw, and I understood in that instant that Claire's collapse was not part of the plan. I was the variable they hadn't prepared for. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I stood in the corner of the room and watched the clock and kept breathing. Claire was conscious, but barely, shaking, her pupils uneven. One of the EMTs, a young woman named Kira, according to her badge, spoke quickly into a radio, using words I recognized from too many years of risk management. Potential ingestion, unknown substance, altered neurological response. Lucas held Claire's hand in the ambulance bay, his face a portrait of devastated husband. He was very, very good at it. I rode separately. My neighbor drove me to Emory University Hospital. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded in my lap and did not say anything for the entire 12-minute drive. At the hospital, a Dr. Renata Vasquez, attending physician, head of the toxicology unit, 17 years of practice, pulled us aside within the hour. She was direct in the way good doctors are direct. Economical, precise, uninterested in comfort. We're seeing markers consistent with acute poisoning, she said. We're running a full tox panel. Do either of you have any idea what she might have ingested? Lucas answered every question too quickly. The cadence was wrong. Not nervous, but rehearsed. He knew where the pauses were supposed to go, and he put them there deliberately. He described Claire's morning in too much detail. What she'd eaten, when she'd woken, what supplements she took, information assembled in advance. Dr. Vasquez watched him. She was very still while he talked. Afterward, in the waiting room, Lucas sat beside me and put his hand over mine. He smelled like his aftershave, something expensive, cedar-based, that Claire had bought him. He said, "Mom, before the investigators get involved, we should probably have the house cleaned. Patricia's been in and out of those rooms all morning." There it was. I felt it land like something dropped from a height. Innocent people protect lives. Guilty people protect scenes. 20 years of reading people, of sitting across from liars in conference rooms, of knowing the difference between confusion and misdirection. Every cell in my body heard that sentence and understood it completely. I looked at my son's hand on top of mine, his signet ring, his father's hands. "No," I said. His jaw tightened. For exactly 1 second, maybe less, the mask cracked, and underneath it there was something I had never seen on my child's face before. Something cold and calculating and completely stranger to me. Then it came back. The mask came back, and he nodded slowly and said, "Of course, you're right. I'm not thinking straight." He was thinking perfectly straight. That night, I called Patricia from my car, parked 3 blocks from my house. She answered on the first ring. She didn't ask how Claire was. She asked, "Are you safe?" We met at a Waffle House on Moreland Avenue at 11:30 p.m. because it is open and bright and full of witnesses, and nobody looks twice at 2 women of a certain age having coffee in a booth. Patricia arrived before me. She had a large manila envelope and a Samsung external drive, and the expression of someone who has been holding a weight so long they've forgotten what their arms felt like before it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you everything." everything, and I need you to hear it without interrupting. I said, go. She had started noticing things about 6 months prior. Claire's early arrivals, always before Lucas, always under some pretext. The grocery run that needed doing right at 9 a.m. The errand that always materialized exactly when Patricia would normally be in the kitchen. The insistence, quiet but persistent, on preparing my coffee. She said you had a preference, Patricia told me. She said you were particular. I thought maybe you'd told her something you hadn't told me. Around the same time, my health had started slipping. Dizziness that came and went without explanation. Fatigue that felt bone deep, different from overwork. Nausea that I blamed on the ibuprofen I'd been taking for a knee that I now suspected wasn't the real problem. I had attributed all of it to stress and age, and the peculiar physical cruelty of being 61 in a demanding industry. My general practitioner, Dr. Frank Omatola, had suggested I consider reducing my workload. At my last physical in July, my blood work had shown anomalies, elevated liver markers, slightly irregular kidney function, that he had attributed to inflammation and scheduled for follow-up. Patricia thought they were attributable to something else entirely. She had started watching Claire, quietly, efficiently, in the way she did everything. She began keeping a small spiral notebook, dates on the left, observations on the right, symptoms she noticed in me, times Claire had been in the kitchen unobserved, the exact sequence of mornings when I'd felt worse. The patterns aligned with terrifying consistency. One morning, Patricia said, turning her coffee cup in her hands, I was in the pantry. The door was ajar. I could see Claire's reflection in the glass panel of the cabinet. She paused. She had a small glass vial, dark brown, the kind pharmacies use for liquid medications. She tipped it into your cup. She didn't know I could see her. My hands were very still on the tabletop. What did you do? I said. I finished what I was doing in the pantry. Then I came out and said I'd forgotten something at the store, and I left. And I sat in my car in your driveway for about 20 minutes until I stopped shaking. She pulled the phone across the table. She pressed play. The audio was not professional quality. It was recorded on Patricia's personal phone, propped against the base of a vase in my dining room, capturing a conversation between Lucas and Claire about 3 weeks before the signing meeting. The sound was slightly muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. My son's baritone, Claire's precise, articulate diction. They were discussing dosage. Lucas was saying, the timeline has to look natural. That's the whole point. If it's too fast, questions get asked. Claire was saying, I know how to calibrate it. I've been doing this for months. Her liver numbers are already where we need them. Lucas was saying, and the policy? Claire, the life insurance was finalized in March. 2.3 million. We're the named beneficiaries. Both of us. I made sure it was worded so that a diagnosis of organ failure within the window still pays out. Lucas, what about the company transfer? We can't wait for the natural timeline. Beaumont's going to push back on the succession framework if we give him more time. Claire, which is why we do both simultaneously. She signs, she drinks. We have the shares and the policy within 24 hours of each other. The signing makes it look like a planned transition. The death looks like what the blood work's been building toward. Silence on the recording. Then Lucas. She won't suspect anything. Claire, she trusts you. That's your job. Keep her trusting you. I listened to the entire recording. It lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I did not move for any of it. When it ended, the Waffle House ambient noise, the hiss of the griddle, someone's booth music, the clatter of plates, rushed back in like water filling a space. There's more, Patricia said. She pulled the manila envelope toward me and opened it. Bank statements, wire transfers, $400,000 moved from a Whitlock Supply Group subsidiary account, one Lucas had controlled operationally since his promotion, to a joint personal account held by Lucas and Claire, beginning in January. The transfers were small, structured carefully below reporting thresholds. 52 separate transactions over 9 months. There were also insurance policy documents. Claire had initiated a life insurance application in my name in February, using a copy of my identification and a physician's signature I had never given. The policy was through a carrier I had never heard of. $2.3 million. Organ failure, stroke, or sudden cardiac event. Covered. Suspicious circumstances. Not excluded in the fine print, which is the detail that matters. Fraudulent application. My signature forged. Patricia slid the second drive across the table. This one has everything I just showed you, plus the audio, plus something else. She hesitated. In 18 years, I had never seen Patricia Osei hesitate. Someone else knew, she said. I found out 2 days ago. I wasn't going to tell you tonight because I wasn't sure how to, but you need to know now. Tell me. Your corporate attorney, James Beaumont. She held my gaze. He knew about the policy. He helped structure the subsidiary transfers. There are emails. I found them in a folder on the household laptop, the one in the study that Lucas uses when he stays over. Lucas had a shared folder synced. He probably didn't know I had the laptop password. A beat. He gave it to me 6 years ago so I could print his boarding passes when he forgot. James Beaumont, 21 years as my attorney. The man who had drafted every major contract in the history of Whitlock Supply Group. The man who had called me on the first anniversary of Richard's death every year for 17 years to check on me. How much? I said. The emails reference a fee. $150,000 paid in installments. The last one cleared in August. I sat back in the booth. There is a moment in catastrophe when the mind goes somewhere past shock, past grief, past rage, into a kind of crystalline, almost surgical clarity. The emotional weather drops out and what remains is pure, cold strategy. Richard used to say I was the only person he'd ever met who got calmer as situations got worse. He was right about that too. Patricia, I said, I need you to listen to me carefully. She nodded. You cannot go home home tonight. You cannot go to your normal places. You need to go somewhere they don't know. A family member, a friend, anywhere that isn't connected to me. Take the originals of everything. I'll have copies made from the drives. She reached into her bag and placed a third envelope on the table. Already done, she said. There are 3 copies. One for you, one for a safe deposit box I opened last week at a branch in Marietta I've never been to before. One for my daughter in Philadelphia. I stared at her. Patricia. Sandra. She looked at me steadily across the table. I've worked for you for 18 years. I know how your mind works. I started preparing for this conversation 2 months ago. The next 72 hours moved like a film at the wrong speed. Too fast in some frames, suspended in others. At 7 a.m. on September 10th, I drove to the DeKalb County Police Department and asked to speak with someone in financial crimes and homicide. I was put in a waiting room for 40 minutes, which I spent reviewing the documents on my phone, organizing them mentally into chains of custody. I was eventually seen by Detective Harl Okafor, 16 years on the force, currently assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit, with a secondary assignment to an interdepartmental task force on elder financial exploitation. He was compact, precise, and took notes in a small blue notebook with a ballpoint pen. He looked at me over the notebook with the expression of someone who has heard a great many things and reserves judgment until the evidence speaks. I placed the external drive on his desk. I placed the printed bank statements beside it. I placed the insurance documents beside that. I placed a printed transcript of the audio recording, which I had spent 3 hours preparing the previous night, on top. My son and daughter-in-law attempted to poison me, I said. My corporate attorney facilitated the financial components of the scheme. I have audio evidence, documentary financial evidence, and a witness. Her name is Patricia Osei. She will cooperate fully. Detective Okafor looked at everything on his desk. Then he looked at me. Walk me through it from the beginning, he said. I walked him through it, all of it. 45 minutes without interruption, except for the moment he asked me to slow down during the financial section so he could note the subsidiary account numbers. At the end, he sat back in his chair and said, Mrs. Whitlock, do you understand what you're alleging? Yes, I said. Attempted murder, wire fraud, insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit all of the above. I need to bring in my lieutenant and someone from the DA's office before we proceed. Of course, I said. I'll wait. Lieutenant Denise Hargrove had 19 years with DeKalb County and the bearing of someone who has stopped being impressed by anything. She came in, reviewed the materials, and asked me 3 questions. Whether I had original documents, whether the witness was available, and whether I had spoken to anyone about this prior to coming in. I told her about Patricia. I told her about the night at the Waffle House. I told her I had not spoken to my attorney, what for obvious reasons, and had not told Lucas anything. She nodded once and picked up her desk phone. The assistant district attorney was a woman named Rachel Voss, 6 years in the DA's office, previously a federal prosecutor. She arrived within the hour and sat across from me and read the printed transcript of the recording twice. She was quiet for a long time after the second reading. The audio is going to require authentication, she said. Chain of custody on the digital files will be scrutinized. The witness will need to be deposed. I understand. The insurance fraud alone is a federal matter. We'll need to coordinate with FBI Atlanta. Whatever is necessary. She looked at me with a directness that I recognized as respect. The professional kind. The kind that has nothing to do with sympathy. Mrs. Whitlock, your son is still at the hospital as far as we know? As of this morning, yes. Good. She closed the folder. We'd like to move on this today. They arrested Lucas at 4:47 p.m. in the hospital parking garage. He had been about to get into his car, a black BMW 5 Series he'd leased 6 months prior, paid for through an expense account he managed, when Detective Okafor and 2 uniformed officers approached him. Patricia told me later, from what she'd seen on the news footage a bystander had filmed, that he looked confused at first. Then he looked past the officers, at nothing in particular, and something in his face went very flat. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He got into the police car with the composure of a man who is saving his panic for somewhere private. James Beaumont was arrested at his Buckhead office at 5:20 p.m. by federal agents, who also served a search warrant on his firm's files. His paralegal later told a reporter that he had gone white as the warrant was read and said nothing except to ask to call his family. Claire was still in the hospital, still being treated. Her blood toxicology panel had confirmed the presence of aconitine, a compound derived from monkshood, a plant-based alkaloid that attacks the nervous and cardiac systems. It is extremely difficult to detect without a targeted panel. It can be titrated precisely. It can be introduced in small doses over time to build cumulative organ damage, or in a larger dose for an acute event. Dr. Vasquez told me quietly, in her office, that the dose Claire had ingested was calculated for a body weight approximately 60 pounds heavier than Claire's own. The dose had been calibrated for me. Claire had poisoned herself with the cup meant for her mother-in-law. In the weeks that followed, the full picture assembled itself in the way these things do. In pieces, through lawyers and courtrooms and depositions and news stories. I tried very hard not to read, but sometimes did at 2 a.m. on my phone in the dark. Lucas and Claire had begun planning it 14 months before the morning of September 9th. The financial forensics team from the FBI's Atlanta field office, led by Special Agent Thomas Briggs, 12 years in financial crimes, traced the subsidiary transfers back to their origin and found not $400,000, but $1.1 million routed across 11 different accounts, some offshore. Lucas had been building an exit fund. He had never intended to run the company. He had intended to inherit it, liquidate the most valuable valuable divisions within 18 months and relocate. James Beaumont had provided the legal architecture for the transfers. He had also, I learned, supplied Claire with the name of a private pharmacological consultant, someone outside normal channels, who had advised on the compound and the protocol. That consultant, a man who had lost his medical license in 2017, was arrested in November in Savannah. The forged life insurance application was prosecuted federally. The policy carrier's internal fraud team testified that the application had been skillfully assembled. My medical history had been accurately represented in most places to make the policy attractive, while certain prescriptions had been omitted. Whoever had prepared it knew pharmaceutical documentation. Claire had been a pharmaceutical sales rep for 11 years. Claire pled guilty in February to charges of attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and insurance fraud. She received 18 years, with possibility of parole at 12. Her attorney argued at sentencing that she had been, in some measure, under Lucas's influence. The prosecutor, Rachel Voss, noted in her closing statement that the evidence showed Claire had initiated the pharmacological research. She had identified the compound. She had calculated the doses. The recordings showed her instructing Lucas, not the other way around. The judge gave her the higher end of the range. Lucas went to trial. He hired private counsel and entered a not guilty plea. The trial lasted 11 days. On the 8th day, the audio recording was played in open court. Authenticated, chain of custody fully established, Patricia's testimony having placed it beyond reasonable doubt. The courtroom was quiet while it played. Lucas sat with his hands folded on the defense table. His face showed nothing. His attorney had told him, "Whatever you do, show nothing." He was very good at following instructions. But when it ended, when the recording finished and the courtroom remained suspended in that particular silence, Lucas turned his head, just slightly, and looked at me in the gallery. I looked back. I had thought I would feel something in that moment. I had expected grief, or rage, or something that would need to be managed. What I felt was nothing in particular, just the steady, even sound of my own breathing, and a kind of finality that had no drama attached to it. He turned back to face front. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They returned verdicts on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, financial fraud, and felony elder financial exploitation. Lucas Whitlock was sentenced to 26 years. My attorneys filed a civil suit against James Beaumont and his firm the following month. The case settled out of court, significantly and quietly, and under NDA terms I was satisfied with. James Beaumont surrendered his law license. He is 64 years old, and I understand he lives very simply now, in a smaller city, in a much smaller house. Whitlock Supply Group went through a 4-month audit conducted by an outside firm, complete forensic review of every account, every transaction, every contract my son had touched in 3 years as VP of Operations. The $1.1 million in transferred funds was partially recovered. Several contracts he had steered to companies in which he and Claire held silent ownership stakes were renegotiated or canceled. The company is fine, more than fine. We had a record fourth quarter. I gave Patricia a full year's salary as a bonus. She told me it was too much. I told her it was not nearly enough and that the conversation was over. She has been with me for 19 years now. She still makes my coffee. I still watch her make it, not out of fear, but out of appreciation for her hands, her movements, the way she knows exactly how much I need and when. Some mornings we sit in the kitchen before the house wakes up and drink it together in silence. She never asks for thanks. She never references what she did. She didn't save my life for recognition. She saved it because it was the right thing, and because after 18 years, she knew me well enough to know that the coffee was wrong even before she understood why. That's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. People assume you won't notice. They assume your silence is ignorance. They assume the stillness in your face is the stillness of someone who doesn't understand what's happening. My son assumed I was just a tired old woman who would drink whatever was handed to her and sign whatever was placed in front of her and disappear gratefully into rest. He assumed that the company I built from $47,000 and a second-hand forklift would simply become his because he had waited long enough to take it. He assumed the wrong things about the wrong woman. 1 year later, September 9th. I'm in the office. My office, still mine. My name is still on the building. It will be on the building for as long as I decide it will be on the building, which is a decision I will make myself in my own time, on my own terms. I have a new succession plan in development. It involves 3 internal candidates who have earned their positions over years of actual work. It is being drafted by a new corporate attorney, a woman named Margaret Chu, former assistant U.S. attorney, referenced by Rachel Voss, who I trust with the full weight of that recommendation. The folders are on my desk. No yellow flags. No predated signature lines. My coffee is beside them. Patricia made it. It is exactly right. I pick it up. I drink it. And then I get back to work. Because the world doesn't pause for grief, and it certainly doesn't pause for people who thought they could bury me before I was finished.